Dr. Upasana Singh is going to be our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so excited to welcome her on board. Dr. Upasana Singh is an academic leader and a senior lecturer in the discipline of Information System and Technology at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Westvale campus in Durban, South Africa. She is also appointed as an adjunct senior lecturer at Victorian Institute of Technology, Australia. She is also the convener and chair of the International Conference on Digital Teaching, Learning and Assessment. She has a keen interest in educational technologies and has served as a lead researcher in the number of international research projects on digital teaching, learning and assessments. Let's go ahead and welcome her on board.
Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from a sunny and a very humid Durban, South Africa. I am Dr. Upasana Singh, a senior lecturer and the academic leader in the discipline of IS&T, which is Information Systems and Technology, at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Durban, South Africa. Today, I'm going to be briefly highlighting for you some of the research results we have on the availability of digital capital, digital fluency, and highlighting the digital divide, if there is any existent in our African higher education institutions. So before we get into the research results, I just want to briefly explain the context of the study. As we all know, traditionally, majority of our higher education institutions in South Africa are face-to-face institutions, which means that our students choose to come to us because they want to experience campus life, they want to experience live lectures, they want to be able to have interaction with their academics, their fellow learners, and of course to experience the social aspects of studying on campus. During the COVID pandemic, of course, all of this came to a halt completely, and for the existing students who were already studying at these institutions, they had to shift to fully online learning. In the same light, the academics who were used to the face-to-face interaction also had to shift to online learning completely. So this online space or the online environment was something which was totally new to both the students and to the academics in most of our face-to-face institutions. The most important aspect to allow or to facilitate the continuity of learning in this online environment was to establish the extent to which our students and the academics had access to technology, had access to devices, had access to network, and had a conducive work environment in which to complete this learning and the teaching. So ensuring digital equity during this time was exceptionally crucial for higher education institutions, not only in South Africa, but around the entire world. So some of the key words which have emanated from this shift to the online space, the first one we look at is known as digital capital. And in terms of digital capital, this is theorized by the skill sets which academics and students have access to, and the set of competencies which they have access to in order to complete this online learning. And I'm just going to use this diagram, which is taken from Raghunatha and Ryu. If we look at the top part of the diagram here, you can see that it clearly highlights the digital access part of it. And in terms of digital access, here we're looking at the technologies, for example, which students and staff needed to have access to. So it's the equipment, it's the connectivity, it's the amount of time which they've spent online, and more importantly than anything else, especially for the academics transitioning from the face-to-face to the online environment, was the support and training which they had available to them. In terms of your digital competencies, here you can see it includes aspects like information literacy, communication and collaboration, digital content creation, the concepts of security and safety online, and then problem solving. The next keyword that we have investigated in our series of studies looks at digital fluency. And digital fluency, in very simple terms, it tries to determine how effectively both the academics and the staff were able to use digital technology in order to construct knowledge, in order to discover meaning, in order to be able to communicate with each other and to communicate and share their ideas in a digitally connected world. And we call this the digitally connected global village. Okay, so I'd like to use the diagram by Derek Wenmouth, which shows the scaffolding of digital fluency. So the first part of digital fluency looks at knowledge, foundational knowledge. How proficient am I in using the technologies? And this essentially links to digital literacy. Okay, conceptual understanding is where the digital literacy comes in. So you know how to use the technology, but do you know how to apply that technology to the specific learning environment? And this deals with your pedagogies. So depending on the objective of that particular module or the content which you are meant to be teaching, have you selected the right tool to deliver that content? And the last one deals with procedural influency, or the highest level of the scaffolding, which includes digital fluency. And this really speaks about how confident are you as a digital citizen. And as a digital citizen, there are many aspects to it, which includes also your digital footprint, understanding how you project yourself in the digital environment. And this is something which we need to teach our students as well as they move to this online space. Okay, so I'm going to start with the academic part of it, and due to time constraints, I'm not going to be able to cover the entire series of research which we have conducted, but I'm starting off with a very simple study which we did, which compared 3 higher education institutions in South Africa itself. And each of these institutions was selected very carefully. So one of them is an institution which has access to good resources, who was able to transition to the online space fairly rapidly. The second institution was the middle institution in terms of the ability to transition to the online space, and they took slightly longer than institution A. And the third institution was an institution which is a historically disadvantaged institution, which obviously took a longer time to be able to transition to this online environment. So the first aspect we looked at when investigating academics, and the first part of this presentation is concentrating only on the academic results, looked at the comparison between how easy it was for the academics at each of these institutions to be able to transition from where they were teaching and how they were teaching before the pandemic to how they were teaching during the pandemic. And as you can see, many of the academics were having no difficulty in their delivery methods in adapting to the location of their teaching prior to COVID, because it was a typical face-to-face environment. But for those academics who responded to the survey and moved to the online space, you can see that a large number of them faced difficulty. They were not comfortable in this transition to the online space. While there were academics who found it fairly easy, the majority of the academics found it difficult. We also try to assess the impact of this transition to the online space, where academics now had access to more online resources to generate content, to complete their tasks, to be able to interact with both their students and their fellow academics. And from this graph, we can see that although academics said in general that they found it useful, 3.6 refers to the mean, and the mean is above 3. So we can see that this is a positive result. They were not very specific about the ways in which they found it useful. So when they were asked whether moving to the online space and the use of online resources enabled them to complete their academic tasks more quickly, this was rather negative. Okay, increase in academic productivity, that also was negative. Made my work easier, close to being more positive, but still negative, and increase the quality of my work. So we still need to do some investigation here to find out why they stated it was useful, yet they did not state positively that it helped in the completion of those various aspects of their tasks. And the last part of the research which I want to share with you is specifically related to the topic today, which is digital capital. And here we developed a series of questions in order to measure the digital capital which was present amongst the academics who responded to our survey. And you can see that the majority of the academics, despite not being confident with the transition to the online environment, despite not having, I would say, full training, though some institutions implemented training and support programs, they were confident in the move to the online space. And we can identify this by just looking at the mean of these results. The only aspect that they felt a little bit uncertain about was how do they identify and interrogate students who are behaving badly or inappropriately in the online space, and how do they curb the cyberbullying aspect, which is one of the negative connotations in terms of moving to the online space. So majority of the digital capital items which were asked in the survey came out as being positive. So in the final slide, which I'm going to show to you about the academic results, in our study, besides digital capital, we also looked at cultural capital, both objectified and embodied. We looked at social capital and economic capital. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through each of these and how these were established in the study. But all I can say from our study is that with the large majority of the academics, they indicated that they did possess digital capital. So as you can see in terms of the summary, there was very little impact in terms of non-availability of resources, non-availability of access for academics in the transition to the online space. And while academics were reluctant to this new approach, they literally had no choice. It was a forced move to the online environment. So they may have faced difficulty. The digital divide during the transition from face-to-face to the fully online environment, while the perception was that this digital divide is rather great, in fact, the results are saying something else. It is saying that the digital divide was minimal. Now, we do understand that the number of responses which we received from the survey is not enough for us to project onto the general population, but it does tell us a little bit of the story in terms of the transition for academics to the online environment. The second part of my presentation is now going to be focusing on the digital divide and the understanding of the digital divide amongst a group of students or a set of students at two institutions, one in South Africa and one in Zimbabwe. And I'm going to share the results of that just for us to understand the digital divide associated with students' transition to the online environment. But before we move on to the results, we need to understand what the digital divide is. And the first level of the digital divide refers to the access to digital devices which students and academics needed to use, as well as access to the internet or any form of connectivity. The next level of the digital divide is often caused by digital literacy, which once again, if you remember back to the diagram that we spoke about when understanding digital fluency, digital literacy was the middle scaffold. And in that digital literacy here, we're looking at the socioeconomic factors, and this ties again back to social capital, which we had in the previous slide, the economic capital, and it's often influenced by age, gender, ethnicity, and location. So we speak about the gender digital divide and how females have less access compared to the males. We speak about location divide, so students who might have been living in rural areas having less access, less connectivity, and ethnicity depending on whether they belong to more disadvantaged backgrounds, especially in the African region. And the final level, third level of the digital divide is often caused by the level of access to technology. So the higher the education levels, the more access to technology. The lower the unemployment, the more access to technology. health, and social status. All of these factors play a significant role in terms of determining the digital divide, and especially establishing those students who come from the disadvantaged backgrounds. So very briefly, we firstly, or one of the aspects which we investigated was their access to the internet. And we looked at access through Wi-Fi connectivity, through mobile data, through access provided by the institutions, and through free data at the institution itself. And what we clearly saw was that in South Africa, for example, there was a great effort, a collaborative effort by government, higher education, and the service providers to provide a set amount of data to the students in order for them to be able to get access to network connectivity in order to complete their classes. So you can see that the majority of them made use of that free data. In Zimbabwe in particular, because students there did have access for a period of time to use the data at their institutions, you can see that that bar is slightly higher. Whereas here in South Africa, students were asked to vacate their campuses, so they were not able to access that free data for an extended period of time. In Zimbabwe, a lot of students also made use of mobile data, whereas in South Africa, you can see that a number of students used Wi-Fi compared to mobile data. And this, once again, could be as a result of data costs, the difference in the data costs. Okay, what stands out very clearly for me here in terms of the amount of data, or the data packages which students were using, you can see very clearly in Zimbabwe that they were certainly making use of more data compared to the packages which were being used by the South African students. Okay, the next aspect looked at the quality, the reliability, the speed, and the signal of this network access which they used in their environments to access online learning. And in most of the cases, you can see that it was good at times, better in the Zimbabwean context than it was in the South African context, except for speed. There was a slightly slower speed identified in South Africa for students, and I think that is also an area of concern. In order for them to complete their online learning, besides access to the network, they also needed access to devices. So we tried to establish what types of devices they were making use for their online learning. And you can see that a number of them made use of multiple devices. The two most common devices were your smartphones and your laptops. In the Zimbabwean region, it was the laptop which was used more, whereas in the South African region, it was a smartphone which was used more. And this speaks a lot to the access, to the considerations which academics need to take in the design of their learning materials for the online environment. Because if a student, for example, is taking an assessment on a smartphone, is your assessment then going to be accessible for the student in terms of readability, in terms of accessibility? So are you using drag and drop questions which are going to be difficult for them to move around? How do you expect them to type out long essay questions when they're using a smartphone? So the types of devices which they're using has an impact on the design and the pedagogy of your learning material. Okay. We also investigated literacy levels, and we did this in two parts. So we looked at general literacy levels in terms of literacy of network, literacy of digital devices, and literacy of the learning management systems. Why we wanted to understand what the literacy level of network literacy was is because we needed to establish if a student has problems connecting to a network, or if their data runs out, or if their Wi-Fi is not working. How capable are they of solving the problems or getting help to solve their problems in order to continue with their online learning? The same applied for their digital devices. So if their smartphone wasn't working, did they have access, or were they able to move to another device in order to continue with their online learning? When they connected, for example, to a Zoom session, did they know how to unmute? Did they know how to correspond with their lecturer during that session itself? Okay. Did they know how to set, for example, a virtual background so if they wanted to keep their privacy in the environment in which they were working it? And then the last one dealt with just understanding whether they knew how to use their learning management systems. And because the majority of the students who responded to the survey were continuing students, we found that their literacy levels of the learning management system was pretty high. So even though they had to now start using the assessment tools in the learning management systems for summative assessments in an uncontrolled environment for the very first time during the pandemic, they didn't seem to face much difficulty in this transition. Okay, the second part of the literacy looked at platform literacy. And here we looked at 4 main platforms which are being used. That's Teams, Google, Skype, and Zoom. And as you can see, Teams and Zoom were probably the ones that they were most comfortable in. And those were the ones which were used by the institutions. Initially, Zoom was used a lot, but Teams also started being used quite a bit during the online sessions. Okay. Then you can see they looked at Google and Skype, and Skype was not really used in many institutions in South Africa, but in the Zimbabwean region, Skype was used for the online environment. Okay, so we then investigated the students' experience in the online environment. And as you can see, South African students seem to have a more positive experience in the transition to the online space, whereas the Zimbabwean students, not as positive as the South African students. And we further did a factor analysis and 2 factors emerged. One was general usefulness and the fostering of independence. So essentially what students were saying in both of these environments, South Africa and in Zimbabwe, was that online learning was generally useful and it helped them to foster independence, to become independent learners. Likewise, we investigated the type of skills which were developed in these students in the transition to the online space. And as you can see, all of the 10 skills which we listed the 9 skills which we listed for the students, they agreed that they had developed all of these skills. Once again, factor analysis we did on this set of skills, and we found 2 sets or 2 groups of factors which emerged. One is personal skills and the other is engagement skills. And both of these skills were developed by both sets of students in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. So they felt that the online environment helped them to develop their own personal skills to become better students in the online space, and better engagement to learn to communicate and collaborate in this online environment. So just to summarize the results of what we found in the student survey, majority of the students accessed the online learning through the data provided by the institutions. They also found that although they did not have prior learning experience in this online space, it was fairly easy for them to navigate and to use the online learning during the lockdown at both of the sites. The transition to the online learning environment was largely positive, and we have already highlighted the aspects which South Africa and Zimbabwe found encouraging to both of them, in particular fostering independence. The greater the literacy skills, when we did the correlations, showed that students who had better literacy skills found it easier to transition to the online environment. And finally, students did agree that they developed certain skill sets in this move to the online space, and these were grouped together as personal skills and engagement skills, which was found at both sites. So thank you for the opportunity to present, and if there are any questions, I would be happy to take the same.
Hi, Dr. Upasana.
Yes, Samira, I'm here.
Thank you so much for the session. It was wonderful having you on board.
Thank you.
So we're going to have questions in the chat box. You can go ahead and take it.
Okay, so the question is dealing with the underlying economic, social, and political conditions, the difference in frame conditions. Yeah, well, I think our series of studies has revealed that the distribution of technological advances and access is not as we believe it to be only among developing countries. It is also in developed countries. So in a study which we did in Australia, even Australian students had difficulty in terms of network infrastructure, in terms of access to devices. So while the perception was that the more developing countries were harder hit, working with my colleagues in the UK and colleagues in Australia, which are largely developed countries, even their students faced what was known as digital poverty, and their institutions had to work around reducing this digital poverty. So of course, your political, your economic, your social factors all play a role in it. And that is why it's important that there needs to be government, private sector, and public sector. They need to work together in order to reduce this digital divide so that we can have better access and better infrastructure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Upasana, for this. So we are going to go ahead and email you the rest of questions so that you can go ahead and reply to the delegates directly. It was a pleasure having you on board, and thank you for a wonderful session.
Thank you, Samira. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Hope you have a great day ahead.